I woke up in a hospital bed with a tube in my throat and a nurse whispering, "Don't trust your family." At first, I thought the medication was playing tricks on me, until I saw my daughter signing papers I never agreed to, and hands reaching for the ventilator keeping me alive. I survived because one woman disobeyed them. And when I came home, I discovered they'd already planned my funeral, toured my house with realtors, and emptied my drawers. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when the people you love the most decide your life is worth more without you in it. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel as we have a special story that'll be released soon. I woke to the slow rhythm of machines breathing for me. The room was dim, washed in that cold hospital gray that never truly becomes morning or night. My eyelids felt too heavy, my thoughts even heavier, slipping through my fingers every time I tried to grasp them. I didn't know how long I had been lying there or what had happened to put me in this bed, only that my body felt disconnected from itself, like I had been dropped into someone else's skin. A shape leaned over me. At first, I thought it was just another shadow in the room, but then the figure shifted into the soft outline of a nurse. Her badge swung forward slightly as she leaned closer. I expected the usual quiet reassurance, the scripted smile nurses give when patients wake confused. Instead, her expression was tense, and her voice came out in a whisper so thin it almost didn't reach me. "Don't trust your family." The words sliced through the fog in my mind. I tried to blink, to ask what she meant, to force some clarity into my own head. But my throat refused to move. The air around us felt suddenly heavier, as if the room itself was listening. She didn't break eye contact. There was something in her face. Fear, urgency, maybe both. I tried again to speak, but all that left me was a faint rasp trapped under the weight of the ventilator tube. She placed a light hand on my shoulder, enough to steady me but not enough to comfort. The warning echoed in my skull, growing louder with each passing second. My family. Why? What did she know that I didn't? Before I could try again to form a word, the monitor beside me let out a sharp beep, followed by another. The nurse straightened quickly, her mask of professionalism snapping back in place as hurried footsteps approached from the hallway. The room shifted from stillness to movement in an instant. Lights brightened, shadows scattered. I couldn't tell how many people entered, only that their voices were hushed but hurried, overlapping in tones I couldn't decipher. I heard my name once, maybe twice. Someone adjusted the blankets. Someone else checked the foreline. My vision blurred again, the edges of the room dissolving like wet ink. I searched the faces for something familiar, but all I saw were silhouettes moving with purpose, tension filling the air like static. The nurse who had spoken to me stepped back toward the wall, watching the door as though expecting someone else to come through it. She didn't look at me again. Not once. But her warning stayed with me, louder than the machines, louder than the footsteps gathering around my bed, louder than my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Whatever was happening, whatever I had woken up into, I understood one thing with terrifying clarity. I was not safe. The room had emptied just long enough for the air to settle again, leaving only the dull hum of machines and the quiet drip of medication sliding into my veins. I tried to keep my eyes open, but they kept fluttering shut, heavy with whatever sedatives still lingered in my system. I drifted, caught somewhere between waking and sinking, until the sound of the door opening pulled me back. Soft footsteps, whispered voices, familiar perfume. My daughter was the first face I recognized, her silhouette sharp even through my blurry vision. She walked in with quick, purposeful steps, not the kind a worried child takes toward a hospitalized parent, but the kind of stride that belongs to someone arriving with an agenda. Behind her came my son, his jaw clenched, eyes distant, followed by my sister, whose pursed lips and darting gaze told me she was holding onto more nerves than she wanted anyone to see. They formed a small cluster near the foot of my bed, murmuring among themselves instead of coming closer. I waited for a hand on mine, a tear, even a forced smile. But none of them moved. They looked at me the way people look at a painting they aren't sure they understand. My daughter finally stepped forward. She wore a tight expression, the kind she used during business meetings or uncomfortable family dinners. Her voice was soft, but it held no tremor, no warmth. "Mom," she said, touching my arm lightly, almost mechanically. "We're here." I wanted to tell her that something was wrong, that a nurse had whispered a warning that was still clawing at the edges of my consciousness. But the tube in my throat made even the idea of speaking impossible. I tried to lift my hand, to gesture anything, but my body refused, as if I were pinned beneath the weight of my own helplessness. My daughter turned to the doctor who had entered quietly behind them. He handed her a clipboard. Papers. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. She clicked the pen and began signing, her handwriting swift and certain. I strained my eyes, trying to read the words, the headings, anything at all, but everything dissolved into a blur. My heart thudded weakly. Why was she signing so quickly? Why wasn't anyone explaining anything to me? My son stood by the window, arms crossed, tapping his foot. Impatient. My sister kept glancing at the hallway, wringing her hands, avoiding my eyes completely. No one touched me again. No one leaned close. No one acted like a family terrified of losing their mother or their sister. They murmured to the doctor once more. He nodded. My daughter handed the clipboard back without a flicker of doubt. And suddenly, the nurse's warning came rushing back, sharp and cold. Don't trust your family. I stared at their faces, familiar, yet impossibly far away. The room felt colder. My body felt smaller. Something inside me tightened with the kind of fear that doesn't shout but whispers, steady and devastating. Whatever was on those papers, whatever they had just agreed to, it was not for my healing. It was for something else entirely. The room shifted again, that unsettling blend of hurried footsteps and hushed urgency returning like a wave I couldn't brace myself for. My vision had sharpened just enough to catch the tension settling over everyone in the room. The doctor stood near the head of my bed, his eyes fixed on the monitors. My daughter stood beside him, arms folded, jaw tight. My son lingered near the wall, pretending to study a chart he clearly didn't understand. My sister hovered near the door, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. Then came the sound, the soft but unmistakable click of the ventilator as it adjusted. It wasn't a sound I had paid attention to before, but in that moment, it felt like the heartbeat of the room. A steady rhythm that tethered me to the world. Every breath it pushed into my lungs kept me from drifting too deep into the fog swallowing my thoughts. The nurse who had warned me earlier stood closest to the machine. She didn't look at me, but her hand hovered near the control panel as though she were guarding it. Her shoulders were tense, her lips pressed tightly together. It was the look of someone silently bracing for something she wished she could stop. Is everything ready? The doctor asked, his voice low and professional. My daughter nodded. My son didn't speak. My sister looked down at the floor. Then, from somewhere behind the doctor, maybe my daughter, maybe someone else, I heard two words that made the blood in my veins run cold. Go ahead. The nurse flinched. It was slight, almost invisible, but I saw it. And then she stepped back. Not because she wanted to. 'Cause she had to. Hands reached toward the ventilator. I watched in helpless terror as fingers wrapped around the tubing, the buttons, the connections that kept air flowing into my lungs. I tried to move, tried to push out a sound, tried to scream. Nothing worked. My body lay still, a prisoner inside its own failing shell. The ventilator's rhythm faltered. A soft change at first, so small that anyone else might have missed it, but I felt it. My chest tightened. The air coming through felt thinner, as though the machine itself were hesitating, unsure whether to keep fighting for me. Another adjustment. Then everything went silent. Not the room, there were still whispers, footsteps, someone clearing their throat. But inside my body, the silence grew immense. The pressure in my lungs stopped. The ache in my chest deepened. I felt myself sinking backward, down into some dark space where sound couldn't reach me. My thoughts began to scatter like frightened birds. My vision narrowed into a single, shrinking point of light. Faces blurred. Colors dimmed. The echo of the nurse's warning pulsed through my mind like a heartbeat struggling to go on. Don't trust your family. The darkness pressed in. My last flicker of consciousness held onto the outline of the nurse, frozen in place, her eyes shining with something that looked like fear and apology. And then the world folded into nothing. The world returned slowly, like light seeping under a closed door. It wasn't a sudden awakening but a fragile, trembling rise to the surface. At first, I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or drifting into something I wasn't meant to return to. My chest ached with each breath, sharp and heavy, and it took a long moment before I realized the air was coming from a machine again, this time steady, confident, working. I was alive. The ceiling above me came into focus. Sterile white tiles. Soft fluorescent light. The room was different. Larger. No monitors blaring. No crowd hovering. The energy was calmer here, almost too calm. My throat burned, my limbs felt heavy, and my mind swirled with fragments of memory. The whisper, the signatures on the clipboard, the moment the world dropped away. I turned my head slightly and saw her, the nurse from before, seated in a chair near the corner of the room. She wasn't reading or charting or pretending not to watch me. She was simply there like a sentinel. When my eyes met hers, something in her tightened, relief washing over her face before she composed herself again. "You're awake," she said softly, rising from the chair. Her voice didn't carry the casual warmth of a nurse doing rounds. It held something deeper, something protective. "We moved you. You're safe here." The word felt foreign. Before I could ask anything, before I could even try to speak, the door opened. And just like that, the temperature in the room shifted. My son walked in first, followed by my daughter and then my sister. But they didn't rush toward me. They froze in the doorway, staring as though they had seen a ghost sit up. My son's expression hardened instantly, the muscles in his jaw tightening. My daughter's eyes widened, not with joy, but with confusion, maybe even alarm. My sister went pale, one hand lifting to her mouth. No one said my name. No one cried. No one reached for me. Instead, they exchanged quick glances with each other, silent, uneasy, as if my survival had undone something they'd already accepted, or planned for. My son was the first to step inside, but not toward me. He moved to the far wall, arms crossed, face tight with irritation rather than relief. "How long has she been awake?" he asked the nurse, not me. His tone wasn't that of a concerned child. It was sharper, edged with something like anger. The nurse didn't answer him. She positioned herself slightly closer to my bed, and only then did I understand. She wasn't there to observe me. She was there to protect me. My daughter stepped forward next. Her voice trembled slightly, but not in the way a child's voice trembles when seeing a parent alive after nearly dying. It reminded me of someone unprepared for a sudden complication. "Mom, you're awake." We weren't sure." Her words faded, unfinished. My sister stayed by the door, gripping the handle as if she might flee at any moment. Her eyes stayed fixed on me with a haunted, unsettled look. She whispered something under her breath, too quiet to hear, before shutting her eyes briefly, as though wishing herself somewhere else. None of them moved closer. None of them touched me. None of them asked how I felt. Instead, they started whispering. My son leaned toward my daughter, muttering sharply. My daughter shook her head. My sister slipped into the hallway, whispering into her phone. Their voices were low, tense, heavy with disbelief and something darker that made my stomach tighten. The nurse watched them with an expression I couldn't read, but I could feel her body rigid beside me, coiled like someone waiting for a strike. My family wasn't shocked because I had almost died. They were shocked because I hadn't. The next morning the room was too quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in that uneasy way hospitals get when people are waiting for something to happen. I was awake fully now, my mind clearer, the fog lifting just enough for fear to take its place. The nurse, Maria, I finally saw her name on her badge, had stepped out to speak with another staff member. I lay still, listening to the soft shuffle of shoes in the hallway, the rolling of carts, the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Then I heard voices just outside my room. It was my doctor, the same one who'd stood beside my daughter as she signed those blurry papers I never got to read. His voice was low, tired, carrying the kind of weight people only use when they're discussing something complicated. "The DNR order was already in place," he said. "Signed by the daughter. We had no reason to question it." Another voice, another doctor or maybe a supervising nurse, responded quietly. "But she's awake now. If she recovers, she might ask why it was filed. You know how these things go." I felt my breath hitch painfully in my chest. "DNR. Do not resuscitate." The letters rang like metal against glass. My heartbeat thudded through the monitor, too loud, too fast. They were talking about me, my life, my death. My daughter had signed a DNR. I tried to piece together any memory of agreeing to something like that, but there was nothing. No conversation. No paperwork. No moment where I had said I wanted my life ended if things went wrong. I had always been clear. Fight for me until there was nothing left to fight for. So why had my daughter signed a document that told them to do the opposite? My stomach tightened. My hands trembled. The thin sheet over me felt suddenly too light, as though it couldn't protect me from the truth crawling toward me. I strained to listen again. Family insisted she wouldn't want prolonged suffering, the first doctor said. They were adamant. Especially the daughter. My vision blurred, not from medication this time, but from a sharp rush of disbelief so heavy it almost choked me. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt thick, scraped raw by the memory of the tube they'd removed. Adamant. My daughter had been adamant. Footsteps moved closer. The voices lowered. I heard pages being flipped, something like a folder opening, and then another line that froze me completely. The signature matches, but the patient doesn't recall authorizing it. We'll need to verify. The signature matches. Someone had forged my name. Or someone had guided her hand and pretended I agreed. Either way, my voice, my literal right to remain alive, had been stripped away with a single stroke of a pen. The door cracked open slightly. I closed my eyes instinctively, pretending sleep. Through the narrow opening, I saw a glimpse of a table outside, covered in files, pink slips, yellow notes. My name was on top of one of the folders in bold black ink. A document meant to decide whether I lived or died. My daughter's signature beside it. My name at the top. But not my consent. A cold truth settled into my chest. Someone I loved had made a choice for me, not out of compassion or fear, but out of convenience. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had tried to legally erase me. Maria waited until the hallway quieted, until the shadows lengthened across the floor and the last shift-change footsteps drifted away. She closed the door gently behind her, the soft click sounding heavier than it should. When she turned toward me, there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not just concern, but a kind of moral weight she had been carrying alone. "You're strong," she murmured, pulling a chair to the side of my bed. Stronger than they expected. She sat slowly, as if lowering herself into a truth she didn't want to say out loud. "I need to tell you something." My fingers curled slightly against the sheets. My heart thudded unevenly. I couldn't speak yet, not without strain, but she must have seen the plea in my eyes because she nodded, as though granting permission to a conversation I couldn't voice. "Your family," she began carefully, "came in with a story. They were very clear, very certain about what you supposedly wanted." She exhaled, the kind of breath people release when they're stepping into dangerous territory. "They told us you had spoken many times about not wanting heroic measures. They said you feared being kept alive by machines. They repeated it so often it sounded rehearsed." I felt the air leave my chest in a slow, aching rush. Maria continued, her voice softer now. "But when I looked at your chart, I found no prior DNR. Nothing documented. Nothing signed by you in any of your previous admissions." She hesitated, then leaned closer. "For a decision that serious, patients almost always speak up at some point. There are notes, discussions, conversations with physicians." Her head shook gently. "You had none." She glanced toward the door as though afraid someone might be listening. "They kept pushing for us to remove life support. They insisted it was what you wanted. But something about them felt off." I tried to ask what she meant. My throat burned with the effort, but she understood anyway. "The urgency," she whispered. "The way they stood together, all saying the same lines in the same tone. As if they had practiced it. And the questions they asked." She swallowed, her jaw tightening. "Not about your comfort. Not about your prognosis. They wanted to know if your insurance covered long-term ICU care. They asked how soon a death certificate is issued. They even asked how fast your room would be cleared." My chest tightened painfully, as though the truth itself was crushing me. "I didn't like it," Maria said. "None of it felt like grief. It felt like procedure." She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to say the final piece. When she did, her voice barely rose above a breath. "When the doctor agreed to honor the DNR they presented, they were too quick to accept it. They didn't ask for more time. Didn't pray. Didn't hesitate. They watched the machine. Watched you." He paused. "Your daughter nodded before anyone else. Like she was ready." A tremor ran down my spine. "I knew something wasn't right," she whispered. "So when they reached for the ventilator, I waited. I waited long enough for the supervising physician to return, long enough for him to question the paperwork, long enough to keep them from doing something they couldn't undo." Her eyes glistened, not with pity, but with conviction. "They wanted you gone," she said. "And I wasn't going to let that happen until I knew the truth." She placed a gentle hand on mine. "I risked my job to keep you alive," she murmured. "Because someone had to protect you." Her next words came out steady, but they landed like a quiet thunder inside my chest. And from everything I've seen, it wasn't going to be your family. When I was finally cleared to go home, I expected the familiar comfort of my own walls, my own air, my own routines. Instead, I stepped into a house that felt like a stranger had been living inside it. Quiet was wrong. Too still. Too expectant. As if the walls themselves were waiting for me to notice what had happened while I was gone. At first, I thought maybe I had left things in disarray before the hospital. Papers on the hallway table, a cabinet slightly open, a lamp moved a little to the left. But the deeper I walked into the house, the clearer it became that nothing about the disorder was accidental. The drawers in my study were open, not just cracked but pulled all the way out. Files lay scattered across the floor like someone had rifled through them in a hurry. Folders that had once been neatly labeled were flipped upside down, emptied, or stuffed back carelessly. My pulse quickened. I moved slowly, careful with each step, as though I feared waking something that was still hiding in the house. When I reached my desk, the place where I kept the documents that mattered, the fear in my chest tightened into something sharper. The folder that held my updated will was missing, not misplaced. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the ache in my ribs, and pulled at every drawer, every shelf, every binder. I checked inside books, behind picture frames, in file boxes tucked under the desk. The original will was still there, the one made long before everything happened, but the new one, the version that removed certain people from inheriting anything, was nowhere. I sat back against the wall, breathing hard, the realization settling over me like ice. Someone had been in my home. Someone had known exactly what to look for. And someone didn't want that will to exist. My mind raced through possibilities, but the truth was obvious. My daughter knew about the update. My son had argued with me about it months earlier. My sister had tried to talk me out of it. They all knew the will had changed, and they all knew it wouldn't favor them the way the first one did. I closed my eyes, remembering my daughter signing those papers at the hospital. My son's impatience. My sister's pale face when she saw me alive. Their whispers. Their shock, not that I had survived, but that I hadn't died. Of course they had come here. Of course they had looked for it. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and called my lawyer. His voice, calm and measured as ever, softened when he heard mine. "I was expecting your call," he said. "And yes, your updated will is safe. The signed original is locked in my vault." Relief washed over me so hard it left me dizzy. But then he added, "However, a few days ago, your daughter contacted the office requesting all estate documents for review. She said you instructed her to collect them." A cold, hollow feeling settled into my lungs. "I didn't," I managed to whisper. "I didn't think so," he said gently. "So we refused." I looked around my ransacked home, at the overturned drawers, the missing folder, the evidence of desperation scattered across my floor. They couldn't get the will from him, so they tried to get it from me. And if the nurse hadn't intervened at the hospital, they would have succeeded in erasing more than a document. They would have erased me. My lawyer invited me to come in the next morning, saying there were things we needed to discuss in person. His tone wasn't urgent, but it carried a weight that made sleep impossible. By the time I arrived at his office, the exhaustion from the hospital and the fear from discovering my ransacked home clung to me like a second skin. He greeted me with a sympathetic look, the kind people give when they know a truth you're not ready to hear. He waited until the door to his private office closed, waited until I settled into the chair, and then placed a thick folder on the desk between us. "I didn't want to tell you this while you were still recovering," he began, folding his hands. "But you deserve to know what was happening before the hospital." He slid the folder closer, and I could see the tabs marked with dates, some from weeks before I ever collapsed, before anyone knew I would end up in that ICU bed. "Your sister contacted us first," he said. "About 3 weeks before your hospitalization." I felt my stomach twist. "For what?" "She requested access to your financial statements, bank accounts, investment documents, property valuations. She claimed she was helping you organize your estate, but the wording, it didn't sound like something you would say." My pulse thudded in my ears. I had never asked my sister for help with my finances. Not once. And certainly not with anything that hinted at end-of-life planning. "I refused," he continued. "Your privacy laws are clear." She had no legal standing. She seemed irritated but let it go. She hadn't let it go. She had waited for the moment I was unable to speak for myself. My lawyer hesitated before opening the next section of the folder. Then your daughter called. Twice. Felt numb. What did she want? She asked about probate timelines. The word shattered through me like a stone through glass. Probate. The legal process triggered after someone dies. Not sick. Not unconscious. She asked, he continued carefully, how long it takes for an estate to be settled, who becomes executor if no one is specified, and whether next of kin can collect certain assets immediately. He met my gaze. She asked these questions as if she believed you were already gone. I swallowed hard, gripping the arms of the chair to steady myself. My breath felt thin again, like the room was shrinking. And your son? My lawyer asked softly. He didn't ask about timelines. He asked different questions. For a moment I couldn't speak. What questions? He wanted to know what happens to properties if the will is contested, and whether someone removed from an updated will still has the right to challenge it. The lawyer paused. He asked those questions 2 days before you collapsed. My vision blurred. The office suddenly felt too bright, too sharp, too real. They were preparing, not coping, not worrying, not grieving in advance. Preparing for me to die. Preparing for what they thought they were owed. Preparing for a future where I was no longer alive to revise, protect, or decide anything. My lawyer leaned forward, voice careful but firm. I've served your family for years. I know your children. I know your sister. None of this felt like concern. It felt like anticipation. My chest tightened, grief and betrayal tangling into something almost physical. Whatever happened in that hospital, he said gently, did not start there. Well, it hadn't. The plan had started long before the machines beeped, long before the ventilator quieted, long before Maria whispered her warning. They didn't just expect me to die. They were counting on it. I told myself I needed answers. Closure. Something solid to hold on to so the doubts swirling through my mind didn't pull me under. So I called them, my daughter, my son, my sister, and asked them to come to the house. I kept my voice steady, calm, polite even. The kind of tone that leaves people no room to decline without exposing themselves. They arrived within minutes of each other. My daughter came first, stepping inside with that same tight composure she wore in the hospital. My son followed, looking irritated as though the meeting was an inconvenience. My sister entered last, avoiding my eyes, clutching her purse as though she expected the house to swallow her. We gathered in the living room. It was strange how small the space felt with them inside it. 3 people who had once been my comfort, now sitting like strangers waiting for a verdict. I didn't waste time. I know someone broke into my documents, I said quietly. I know my will was taken. And I know each of you contacted my lawyer before I was hospitalized. My daughter scoffed almost immediately. We were trying to help, she said, folding her arms. You've been talking about organizing things for years. We thought you'd want it done. I never asked for that. My voice didn't rise, but something in her expression flickered. Irritation, maybe even guilt. And I didn't authorize a DNR. She stiffened. For a second, silence sharpened the air between us. Then she sighed dramatically, like I was being unreasonable. Mom, you were suffering. You wouldn't have wanted to be kept alive like that. We were thinking about what was best for you. The words hit me like a cold slap. Not because of what she said, but how easily she said it. How confidently she rewrote my wishes into something convenient for her. My son leaned forward, not with concern but with annoyance. You're acting like we were planning something. We were overwhelmed. We were trying to figure out how things would work if... He stopped, then shrugged. If things went the way they looked like they were going. The way they looked, I repeated, hearing the hollowness in my own voice. He didn't notice. Or didn't care. Speaking of which, he continued casually, you still haven't told us what's happening with your accounts. The joint ones. The house too. Are you keeping everything in your name now, or? My health, I said slowly, is what you want to discuss second? He blinked. What? I'm just asking practical questions. Practical. Not emotional. Not supportive. Not grateful I was alive. Practical. My sister finally spoke, her voice thin. You scared us, she whispered. We didn't know what to do. And we panicked. She kept her eyes on her lap. We thought you'd want peace if things got worse. But there was something off in her tone. Too rehearsed, too careful. And when I looked closely, she wasn't shaking from sadness. She was shaking from fear. Fear of the conversation. Fear of being found out. "Why did you come into my house?" I asked her. She flinched. "I didn't." "The drawers," I said. "The files. You knew where I kept the will." Her silence was answer enough. My daughter stood abruptly, frustration spilling over. "This is ridiculous. We were trying to be responsible. You make it sound like we wanted something to happen to you." I met her eyes. For the first time in my life, I saw nothing familiar in them. "I know what you did," I said softly. "And I know why." My son looked away. My sister wiped the corner of her eye. My daughter stiffened like someone preparing for a fight. None of them apologized. Not one reached for me. No one asked how I felt, how I slept, whether I still woke up gasping from the memory of them standing by as the ventilator went silent. Instead, they all reacted to the same fear. Fear that I had survived long enough to see them clearly. The illusion of family shattered in that moment. And in the broken pieces, I finally saw the truth they had tried so hard to hide. 2 days after the disastrous meeting with my family, I stepped out onto the porch just to feel air that didn't smell like antiseptic or fear. My body was still weak, but the silence inside the house had become unbearable. I needed distance, even if only a few steps away from the front door. I was halfway to the mailbox when I heard a familiar voice call my name. Mrs. Langford, my next-door neighbor for nearly 20 years, was watering her garden, a soft spray misting over her marigolds. She hurried toward the fence when she saw me. Her expression a mixture of relief and something else. Something troubled. "You're home," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "Thank God. I've been praying for you." Her concern felt genuine, so real and warm that it nearly buckled the thin defenses I'd been holding together these past days. But then her face tightened, and she glanced toward my house as if expecting someone to step out at any moment. "There's something I need to tell you," she said quietly. My pulse quickened. Those words, spoken in that tone, never come before anything good. She put down the hose, wiped her hands on her apron, and leaned closer. "I didn't want to bring it up right away, not when you've just come home. But after everything I've heard, I think you need to know." I braced myself. "Your daughter was here," she said, lowering her voice. "More than once." I nodded slowly. "My lawyer mentioned she contacted his office. I figured she might have been around." Mrs. Langford shook her head. "No, not like that. She wasn't just checking on the house." I felt something cold slip down my spine. "What do you mean?" "She brought realtors," she whispered. 2 different ones." The words hit me hard enough that I steadied myself on the mailbox. "She what?" "They were walking through your yard, your living room, your kitchen," she said, her expression tightening. "Pointing at things. Measuring walls. Talking about renovations. And your daughter kept saying things like, 'Once the paperwork clears,' and 'we can list it fast.'" My breath stalled. "List it? List my house?" Mrs. Langford nodded, guilt flickering across her face as if she felt responsible for delivering the blow. "One of the realtors asked how soon the property would be available. And she told them, your daughter told them, that it depended on hospital documentation and final signatures." The world seemed to tilt. My knees threatened to give out. "She said you," she hesitated, swallowing. "She said you weren't expected to come home." Not expected to come home. Not fighting. Not recovering. Not returning. Expected to die. I stared at my neighbor, the words echoing in a place inside me that still felt raw and bruised. She reached out and touched my arm gently. "I didn't want to assume the worst," she said. "Families say strange things when someone is ill. But the way they spoke, it wasn't grief. It was business." My throat tightened painfully. I looked toward my house, the one I'd built memories in, the one I kept warm for holidays and birthdays and late-night talks. To think they'd walk through it like it was already theirs, a commodity to sell instead of a home that still held my breath and heartbeat. It was almost more than I could bear. "Did they come inside?" I asked. Mrs. Langford nodded. "Your daughter had keys. And she acted like she had full authority to make decisions. She told them it wouldn't take long once the estate processed. Final signatures. They were speaking about me as if I were paperwork. Task to finalize. A property to liquidate. Not a mother. Not a sister. Not a living woman still fighting for breath." Mrs. Langford squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, even though each inhale scraped against the truth now settling hard inside my chest. They hadn't been preparing for my recovery. They had been preparing for my absence. Long before the machines went silent. The house felt different after talking to my neighbor. Not just violated but watchful. Like every corner waited for me to pull back another curtain and see something else I had missed. I walked inside slowly, closing the door behind me, and stood in the middle of the living room, letting the silence settle. The same silence they must have stood in while imagining the place without me. I needed clarity, proof. Something solid enough to quiet the part of me that still wondered if I was imagining the worst. So I began with the practical things. The things that didn't lie. I started in my bedroom. My jewelry box, small wooden, carved by hand decades ago, sat slightly open. I hadn't left it that way. Inside the arrangement was wrong. Necklaces tangled. The velvet tray flipped. And a few pieces were missing. The gold bracelet my mother gave me, the sapphire ring I never wore but always kept. They weren't valuable enough to sell for a fortune, but they were mine. And someone had gone through them with a purpose. The dresser drawers were next. They were closed but not with care. Clothes thrown back in, not folded. Paper envelopes shoved so deep that the corners bent. I sifted through everything slowly, methodically. Bank envelopes, receipts, statements. But several months' worth of documents were missing entirely. Gone without a trace. My heart began to beat faster. I moved to my home office. The same place where the will had been taken. I opened the drawer where I kept my bank folders. The folder with my checking account statements was intact. But the one with my savings emptied. Completely. As if someone had taken every piece of paper inside it. I logged into my account online, hands shaking as I typed. The numbers were the same. No unauthorized withdrawals. But someone had been studying, researching, preparing. Then I checked the voicemail on the landline. The number none of my children ever called unless they needed something. I played the messages through the speaker. The first few were the usual spam. Then came my son's voice, sharp and impatient. "Yeah, Mom, it's me. Call me back. I need to know if you added me to the joint account yet. We talked about this." We had never talked about that. The next message was from my daughter. "Mom, please answer your phone. I left the documents on the table. Sign them so I can bring them to the office." Documents. Left on the table. I never saw them. Another message followed. This time her voice low, irritated, unaware the machine was recording her muttering to someone else. "She's not answering. I told you she never prepares. If she'd just finished the paperwork, we wouldn't have to rush." But, for what? Then came one from my sister, her tone tired, thin. "Call me, okay? The kids are worried and there are things we have to get in order. Just in case." Just in case. The words rippled through me, cold and unmistakable. I moved from room to room after that, gathering every piece of information I could find. Letters. Business cards from the realtors my neighbor had described. A property assessment sheet my daughter must have left behind in her haste. And tucked beneath a stack of mail on the kitchen counter, a printed list titled Estate Checklist, with several items already crossed off. Executor selection. Property valuation. Bank account identification. My name sat at the top of the page, printed neatly like a label for a project. I stared at the bundle of documents in my hands, the missing financial papers, the messages, the scattered belongings, the checklist. This wasn't panic. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't grief in advance. This was organization, preparation, coordination. Long before I lay in a hospital bed with machines breathing for me, they had been planning for a future without me. And not one of them had expected me to live long enough to see it. My lawyer's office felt different the second time I walked in. The first visit had been about uncovering what happened. This one was about deciding what would happen next. I carried a folder stuffed with evidence. Printed emails, realtor business cards, copies of my bank activity, even a photo of the ransacked drawers in my study. But the weight I carried wasn't in the folder. It was in the knowledge that I could no longer pretend my family's actions came from panic or misunderstanding. My lawyer rose when I entered, giving me the kind of patient, steady nod that told me he already knew why I had come back. "Sit," he said. "Let's take our time." I placed the folder on his desk. Some of the papers spilled out, forming a messy pile between us. He glanced over them with a slow exhale. That confirms everything I suspected, he murmured. You're not imagining this. I took a breath, steadying myself. I want to rewrite everything. All of it. He closed the folder gently. Then we start fresh. He pulled a thick stack of forms from a drawer, placing them in front of me. The pages were crisp and heavy, each one representing a line I was drawing, a boundary I was carving into stone. A trust, he said, tapping the first document. This will protect your assets from anyone not explicitly named. It prevents immediate access after death. Prevents contest. It prevents manipulations. He nodded. My hands didn't tremble this time. We'll also restructure your estate plan, he continued. Certain accounts will require dual verification for changes. Access permissions will be restricted. Medical directives will be updated with explicit terms so no one can interpret your wishes again. He said the word interpret with a careful bitterness that told me he understood the betrayal on a level deeper than legality. And, he added gently, we will specify who is and who is not to be notified or involved in medical decisions. My throat tightened. And none of them are to be included. He looked me straight in the eye. I assumed as much. For the next hour we went through every detail, every clause, every protection. It felt like disassembling a house while still living inside it. Painful, necessary, disorienting. When we finally reached the last signature line, I hesitated only for a breath. Not out of doubt but out of mourning. Mourning the version of myself who once believed family meant safety. Sign. My lawyer gathered the documents, tapping them into a neat stack. These are ironclad, he said quietly. Impenetrable unless you change them yourself. I nodded, grateful but exhausted. He leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment before speaking again. There's something you need to understand, he said. When they find out, and they will, they won't take it well. I swallowed. I know. Your children believed they were already positioned, he said. Your sister believed she had influence. They feel entitled, and entitlement turns into anger when the outcome changes. Let them be angry, I whispered. Let them feel whatever they want. They made their choices. He nodded slowly, a quiet respect in his eyes. Then you understand what comes next. I did. What came next wasn't revenge. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was distance, protection, a future built without fear. And for the first time since the ventilator went silent beneath someone else's hands, I felt a flicker of peace. A future shaped by choice. Not theirs but mine. I didn't expect them to find out so quickly. I thought the changes would remain quiet for at least a little while. Long enough for me to breathe without the weight of their shadows pressing against my door. But entitlement has a way of sniffing out the slightest shift in control, and within days, the peace I had begun to rebuild cracked like thin glass. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I just finished making tea when pounding rattled the front door. Loud, frantic, the kind of knocking made by people who believe they have a right to enter any space, even ones they no longer belong to. Before I could reach the handle, the voices started. Open the door. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't do this to us. I opened it because I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to see what desperation looked like when the mask of concern finally fell away. My daughter barged in first, her face flushed with anger. My son followed, muttering curses under his breath. My sister entered last, her eyes wide, already glistening like she wanted the performance of heartbreak to soften what they were about to do. None of them asked if I was feeling well. None of them asked if I was strong enough to stand. They saw only the documents they weren't supposed to have access to, the changes in the trust, the removed names, the protections they hadn't expected. My daughter slammed a stack of printed pages onto the coffee table. What is this? What did you do? I looked at the papers, then at her. I protected myself. She scoffed loudly, pacing in front of the couch like a frustrated attorney preparing an argument. This is insane. You're cutting us out entirely. After everything we've done for you. My son stepped closer, jabbing a finger toward me. You think strangers deserve your money more than your own kids? You think that's fair? Fair. The word felt like a bitter joke. My sister sat down, burying her face in her hands. People will talk, she whispered. Do you realize how this will make our family look? Their words circled me like vultures, each one picking at a different piece of what they wanted. My daughter raged about money. My son threw thinly veiled accusations about loyalty and duty. My sister worried about reputation, neighbors, gossip, image. But not once, not even for a passing second, did any of them ask about the hospital. Not one of them said they were grateful I survived. Not one said they were glad I was breathing, walking, standing. Not one asked if I was okay. "You almost died," I said quietly. "Do you remember that?" "'Cause I do. I remember what you signed. I remember what you told the doctors. I remember your urgency to end things. And now you stand in my home screaming about inheritance." My daughter's face hardened. "We didn't want to see you suffer." "You didn't want to wait," I corrected. My son threw his hands up. "So you're punishing us for being realistic." "Realistic," I repeated. "Is that what you call planning my funeral while I was still alive? Bringing realtors to value my home? Requesting my financial records before I even collapsed?" Their silence lasted only a second, just long enough to expose the truth, before the shouting began again. "You're being dramatic. You misinterpreted. You're not thinking clearly." The same chorus of excuses, each one louder than the last. I stood still, letting their words wash over me until their voices blended into a single piercing hum. It wasn't anger that rose in my chest. It was clarity. A calm, steady understanding that I had done the right thing. That I had saved myself from people who only saw me as a gateway, a signature, a transaction waiting for a final breath. Eventually, their voices ran out of momentum. Their outrage sputtered into frantic murmurs. And then, one by one, they stormed out the same way they came, full of noise, fury, and wounded entitlement. When the house finally fell silent again, I sat down on the couch, hands trembling but heart steady. They had finally shown me the truth. Not through what they lost, but through what they never cared enough to ask about. My survival. The days after my family's outburst left the house heavy with an ache I didn't have words for. It wasn't loneliness. Loneliness is a quiet emptiness. This was different. This was the weight of knowing the people I had raised, loved, and trusted had looked at my life as something negotiable, something useful only in absence. I moved through each room slowly, relearning the house without their shadows clinging to it. And somewhere in the middle of that numbness, something unexpected began to happen. People started showing up. Not the ones who shared my blood or my name. Not the ones who insisted they knew what was best. It was the quiet people. The ones who had slipped in and out of my life over the years with gentleness instead of demands. Maria came first. She didn't call. She didn't text. She simply knocked lightly, almost apologetically, and when I opened the door, she stood there holding a small bag with soup and bread inside. She looked like she'd hurried from a shift. Her hair pulled into a loose bun, her scrubs slightly wrinkled, exhaustion written along the lines of her eyes. But there was something soft in her expression, the kind of softness that only comes from someone who truly cares. "I just wanted to check on you," she said. "Not as a nurse. As someone who didn't want you to be alone." Those words struck deeper than she could have known. She stepped inside, helped me settle into a chair, and sat with me quietly. She didn't ask for details. She didn't push for explanations. She didn't mention the hospital except to ask, gently, if I was sleeping better. When she finally left, she hugged me with a warmth that felt like it was patching something inside me. The next day, Mrs. Langford came by with flowers from her garden. She fussed over me in the way only older neighbors can, adjusting pillows, asking if I needed errands done, promising to keep an eye on the house. She spoke softly, never once asking probing questions, never once mentioning the realtor she'd seen. "Just say the word," she said, touching my hand. "You helped me when Harold passed. Let me return the kindness." A few volunteers from the community center where I used to help with weekend meals stopped by with cards signed by people whose names I hadn't heard in years. They told me stories about the work we had done together. Meals shared, children fed, families helped. One of them even fixed the broken light on my porch without being asked. Later that week, a knock sounded on the door, softer than the frantic pounding of my children but familiar in a different way. When I opened it, I found Elaine, an old colleague turned friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. She had driven across town after hearing through a mutual acquaintance that I had been in the hospital. "You don't have to explain anything," she said before I could speak. "I just wanted to see you with my own eyes." She stayed for hours. We talked about old memories, the good ones, the ones untouched by disappointment. She brought laughter back into the house for the first time since I'd returned home. The sound felt foreign and comforting all at once. Over the next several days, the pattern continued. Small acts of kindness, quiet gestures, gentle presences. People who stepped into the hollow spaces my family had left behind and filled them not with questions or expectations, but with care. True selfless care. Not one of them asked what was in my will. Not one asked about the house. Not one hinted at anything transactional. They asked if I was eating, if I needed help getting to appointments, if I wanted company during the hours that felt hardest. They asked about my heart, my health, my strength, and slowly, piece by piece, the jagged feeling inside my chest began to soften. The healing didn't come from bloodlines or last names. It came from kindness offered freely, without condition. In the quiet, in the unexpected places, I found something I didn't realize I still had. People who showed up not because they stood to gain, but because they cared that I was still here. The mornings feel different now. They begin quietly, without the shadow of someone else's expectations pulling at the edges of my day. I wake slowly, letting the light fill the room at its own pace, and for the first time in a long time, I breathe without wondering who might be waiting for me to fail, to weaken, to vanish. There's a stillness to this new version of my life. A fragile but honest kind of peace that I didn't even realize I had been craving. It's strange how close I came to disappearing. Not in the dramatic way people imagine, but in the quiet, calculated way that happens when others decide your fate long before you're ready to surrender it. I think about the machines, the silence, the hands reaching for the ventilator. I think about signatures forged in certainty, realtors walking through my home, and whispered conversations about probate timelines. But when I sift through it all, when I peel back the terror and betrayal, I find something sharper beneath the surface. The deepest wound wasn't the attempt on my life. It was how easily they believed I wouldn't fight back. They counted on my silence, on my trust, on my love for them. They believed that love made me vulnerable enough to accept whatever they decided. That grief, or guilt, would keep me from seeing the truth. They believed the mother they had always known, the sister they had relied on, the woman who always chose peace over conflict, would quietly slip away without raising her voice. That was their mistake. Because survival is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, determined, a slow reclaiming of breath after breath until you stand again, not out of strength, but out of refusal. I didn't need to scream to reclaim my life. I didn't need revenge or dramatic confrontations. I needed clarity, boundaries drawn with ink instead of hope, choices made for myself instead of for others. My lawyer helped me put protections in place, layers of safeguards that made my future mine again. But the real shift didn't happen on paper. It happened in my heart. I no longer measure family by blood, but by presence, by kindness, by the people who show up without being asked. Maria stopping by after long shifts. Mrs. Langford leaving flowers on my porch. Old friends calling just to hear my voice. Volunteers dropping off groceries with handwritten notes of support. They stitched me back together in ways my own children never tried to. I've learned not to open my door to rage disguised as entitlement. I've learned that love is not an excuse for harm. And I've learned that peace is something you choose again and again, even when your heart trembles. Some days I still feel the echo of that hospital room, the fading heartbeat, the moment the world slipped to black. But now, when the fear rises, I place a hand over my chest and remind myself, I survived. Not in the way they expected. Not for the reasons they wanted. I survived for myself. I sit on my porch in the evenings now, watching the sun soften the sky. There are new voices in my life, gentle ones, steady ones, and the old ones have faded into the distance where they belong. I don't hate them. I don't wish them harm. I simply won't allow them the power to shape my life again. I rebuild quietly, heal slowly. I choose who enters my world carefully. And above all, I hold tight to the one truth that saved me in the end. Being left for dead is not the same as being gone. I am still here. And now, finally, I am mine.